Hey, welcome back to the channel. I am super thrilled that you're here because I've got a really interesting topic for you guys. And this one happens to be a request from one of the subscribers of this channel. So the question is, how do I write drum parts for my song? Or how do I go about programming drum parts for my song? And usually when I get questions of this nature, either through Instagram DM or somebody who knows me personally gives me a call, we get on some kind of a session. Maybe it could be a 1 hour class that they book with me, and we try and go through their questions and try and find answers and see how we can solve if there are any problems or hurdles that they need to get past in their musical journey. But I thought a question such as this, that is writing drum parts, is something that more people would be struggling with, and I thought this qualifies for a YouTube video, and hence I'm making this video for all of you. So let's dive into it without much delay. It's a pretty intense topic, and I hope this benefits you quite a bit. Drums is the backbone of any song, and I think we can't deny that. It provides you the beat, it provides you the pulse, it provides all the other instruments in a band to kind of hold on to something and follow. It provides the tempo, it provides sort of like the backbone structure to a song. So drums are very important. Now, given that we're all in a digital age where recording equipment is getting more and more affordable, and more people are actually attempting recording their music in their bedrooms. Not that it's wrong or bad. There is a challenge with it when it comes to recording drums, because drums, firstly, is a very loud instrument. Secondly, you need a great drummer, which is a given, and also a great sounding drum kit, well tuned with good brand new heads and all of that. And you need a room that is acoustically treated, where you can play and the drum sounds good in that room. Also, soundproofed enough for the sound to not leak out and your neighbors to not come banging on your door complaining that you're making a lot of noise. And apart from that, you need a ton of microphones and also preamps or enough channels on your interface to be able to record a drum kit. Now, all of these things is by itself is a reason why most people with home studio setups not attempt trying to record drums, because it's just too cumbersome. It's too tedious to kind of get into all of this. And it's fair enough. It's understandable. I'm truly grateful that I have this space in the studio where I can actually track drums. I can track guitars, amps with like cranked up guitar amps and stuff like that. And it's really grateful to have such a space here for me to be able to do that. But anyway, if you are a newbie or somebody who's been doing this for a little while and you kind of want to figure out how do I go about writing drums, then I think this video is completely and totally for you. Example number one would be for somebody who has recently started off and all you have is your laptop and a recording software, and you wish to write drum tracks or a drum part for your song or composition. Let's look at how you can do this. I'm using Logic Pro to demonstrate all the examples here, but you should be able to replicate this on any DAW of your choice. However, there are few features that are very specific or exclusive to Logic, and I'll let you know through the video as I get to it, so that you're not spending too much time searching for those in other DAWs and you may or may not find them. Create an empty MIDI region to begin with, because this will allow us to draw notes within that region, and then we can try and write drum parts. Let's make this 2 bars long. To begin with, I'm going to start my pattern with a kick. And what I'm going to do is use my pencil tool here to start writing drum parts. And along with kick, I want to add my crash left and a crash right. I want to be able to play both along with kick. Let's kind of maximize this a little bit. Okay. And now soon after that, I want to go to a hi-hat pattern, because I'm imagining the drummer hit the kick with both the cymbals and then switch the right hand to the hi-hats and sort of like play a snare and hats together after that. So that's what we're going to do. I'm using a rim shot here because I want a slightly more powerful sound. Sorry. And then we're going to have another snare and then add a kick along with the hat, then an empty hat, then another snare with a hat, an empty hat, and a kick along with a hat. So we're going to just do this pretty much. Something of that sort. Let's give this a listen first, quickly. Some things may need a little bit of editing. Sounds great. Now, the thing with this is that you can imagine, or you can see that a lot of these things are of the, I mean, pretty much every MIDI note that I've written so far is of the same color. So which means they're all of the same velocity. Now, an actual drummer would never play the drums this way. They're never going to be hitting every single element of the drums with the same kind of intensity. So we got to change it. How are we going to do it? Instead of selecting everything, I prefer doing it separately. So my hats would have a random velocity. Let's say starting at about 90, I would go to maybe 110, like have a quite a, different, you can see the colors have changed and there's a little more dynamics. As far as the snares and the kicks are concerned, I'm going to change the velocity, but not too much because I don't want my kick and snare to sound all over the place. Maybe if we're doing about 100 to maybe 110, a very gradual increase or decrease of velocities between the kick and snare and the cymbals by itself. I mean, I want to use a lesser velocity for the left because I'm assuming the right would have more power when you're playing and you may end up hitting the right a little more harder. I guess kind of. Okay, so that sounds a lot more realistic. That's beginning to sound a little better. Now, what if you want to try and make the beat more interesting? We don't want to just add this. So I want to add an additional kick here. And I'm keeping the intensity or the velocity of this kick low because when a drummer plays two kicks, the first kick is bound to be a bit softer. Something like that. Maybe push it a little more. Beginning to sound good. And maybe here I want to try and open my hats and I want to have a foot close, then come back to a natural hat. Maybe let's try and sustain this a little more. Remove that. Nice, interesting, and maybe somewhere, maybe let's try and add an additional hi-hat here. And what we can do is reduce these a little bit. The first one is going to be sort of like the harder one. The second one is going to be softer, played by the left hand. And the third one is going to be maybe a little soft. Okay, let's try and see this. You can do a very similar thing, especially if you're writing a pop track, because trust me, I mean, when you're using some sort of a rhythm machine-based drum grooves, then it's so much more easier to work. Especially, you want to write a 4 on the floor kind of a pattern that gets used in pretty much all of electronic music, or, most of it, if not all of it. It's a very similar thing as a piano roll, but just that it's, looks a bit different. And you see there are 4 grids to each bar, so which means that's a subdivision of 4. That's 16th note subdivisions. And you're going to add that. Maybe reduce the velocity of this kick a little bit because it's played along with the snare. Let's listen to this. Okay. Okay, let's change the velocity just a bit. Yeah, beginning to get a bit cool. Now, suppose you want to add some sort of Okay, and yeah, I mean, you can do some really cool stuff like this. This one is called an Autumn Leaves kit from within Logic Pro. So it's a preset by Logic. And the previous one that I was using this drum kit called the SoCal kit from within the Logic library, if you want to try them at home. So I hope that gives you an idea of how you can use the piano roll and kind of do some really cool things, or the step sequencer and do cool things. There are some differences between the step sequencer and piano roll, although it looks very similar. A step sequencer is limited by the number of steps here. You see, you can either have 12 step, or you can have 16 steps, or you can have 24 steps or 32 steps. You can add whatever you want, but you're limited by that. And secondly, suppose you want to swing the groove and make them sort of like play differently. The options for you to do that is a little limited here. You can't really swing and turn things and make it sound like ridiculously different. It does get a bit tricky. Whereas on a piano roll, you can pretty much do whatever, because if you wish to quantize these drums, you can quantize them to so many different quantized values here. And if you understand pretty much what each of these does, then I think it just sounds great. And, maybe reduce the quantizing. I don't want to whatever. Yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea. The advantages of using this piano roll method of writing drum parts. The first advantage, it's the easiest way to write drum parts. All you need is your laptop and a software. The second thing is you don't need a Midi controller, so which means you save money. You also save some real estate in your backpack, especially if you're somebody who makes music on road, and you don't need to carry a lot of things. Third thing is it's epic if you're making some kind of a pop track or an electronic dance music track, because pretty much, honestly speaking, they all use a piano roll to write their drum parts. It's so simple and so easy that you don't need to think too much, and you don't need any kind of extensive setup to be able to write the parts that they use in their track. The cons of using piano roll method is it's really hard to write complex drum parts, especially if you're tracking something more like jazz or maybe progressive and stuff. It can get a little bit harder to write drum parts, because when it comes to clicking through and kind of finding, especially if you're not a drummer, you don't have that kind of a knowledge of subdivisions and note values and all of that stuff, then you're going to find yourself in a very challenging situation to be able to figure out where to click, where to move, what value am I supposed to be quantizing these parts, and all kinds of things like that. So it can get a bit tricky. It requires time to edit, which pretty much is kind of like I spoke about it in point number 1. You need to edit velocities, because when you use the pencil tool and write or draw notes on the grid on piano roll, you realize, as I was showing in the video, everything happens to be with the same velocity. So if you want to change it, you need to manually move things, and that is time consuming, and especially kind of like listening to it, going back and forth, takes a lot of time. The third cons that I would say would be you need a good understanding of how rhythm works. Sort of like touched upon this earlier. You need to think like a drummer. I think by far this is the biggest con, if you ask me, because most often when you listen to drum parts that are written on a piano roll, some of them actually sounds a bit inhuman, because a drummer in their natural state would sort of never attempt to play something of that sort, because end of the day, you have two hands and there's only so much that you can do with that. Like, for example, you can't be playing a snare, a floor tom and a cymbal at the same time. It's just not going to happen. So when you're writing drum parts, it's very easy and tempting to just click away and write something that just sounds okay. Like, oh wow, I want something that makes it sound bigger. Let me just add another drum on this, or maybe another cymbal on this. But you have to think, like, is this something that an actual drummer would be able to play or not? because if it's not, then I think you need to kind of pull back. If you're looking for something that sounds more realistic and you want to try and emulate the effect or the sound of an actual drummer playing, then you got to keep this in mind. You got to know how to think like a drummer. The next cons would be you're limited by the available samples and the sound modulation and articulations available within your library. This is something that actually works as a cons for pretty much all the methods that I'm going to be talking about in this video, because end of the day, if you're using a sample library, whatever samples the library provides, whatever different articulation it provides, and the curve, the articulation curve, how it switches from one sort of an articulation to another articulation when you change the velocity of your notes. And if it's limited by 2 or 3 articulations, then you can't do anything in between those 2 or 3. It gets a bit harder. So that's where actual drummers kind of stand out. Actual drum recordings with a live acoustic kit that's what makes it stand out. But anyway, we're talking about how to get by without one, and I think you can do more than just get by if you really observe some of these rules and kind of help yourself with your drum performances. The next method happens to be writing drum parts using the virtual instrument libraries, but using a Midi controller such as what I have in front of me. And this one happens to be a Native Instruments S61 keyboard. You can also use a trigger pad based controller, something like maybe the little Akai here, or you can use a Novation Launchpad, or there's so many out there that you can try and play with. And what this does is it helps you get a slightly more natural kind of a performance that you can capture. And for this little tutorial, I actually want to disable the click, because the software that I'm using to capture screen to make these videos introduces a ton of latency, and every time I hit a key, there's a massive delay from the time I hit the key and from the time the sound comes out. Yeah, you see that? It's enough for me to kind of be completely thrown off when I'm writing parts. Yeah, the latency kind of gets a bit bugging and unable to play on a click exactly on time. So I'm just going to turn off the click and show you what you can do with a MIDI keyboard, okay? You can do so many things, and they're all velocity sensitive. So even if you change the way you hit your kick soft, you can do so much. And especially when you're doing these build-ups, like they sound so much more natural as compared to doing that on a piano roll. It's going to be a nightmare. You're going to have to program it and do a slope of your velocity curve and all of that. So editing takes more time in that, whereas in this, you can kind of like play them the way you intend to hear it. But again, it takes a little bit of time for you to kind of get used to this whole playing using your finger stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's the part. But that's another way that you can actually write MIDI parts for MIDI drum parts for your song. The pros of being able to record or write drum parts using a MIDI keyboard is, firstly, it's a lot easier, again, because click away. And also, it's easier to get something that sounds more realistic, and it has difference in velocities and stuff because you're triggering keys at different velocities. So that kind of gives a more realistic result. It also takes lesser time to edit because you're getting a lot of those things right while you're playing. The cons are you really need to develop the skill of being able to play drum parts on a MIDI keyboard, especially if you don't want to do the kicks and the snares and hats separately. You want to kind of like play them like an actual drummer would do. If you want to try and do that, then it takes a little bit of getting used to clicking at the right time. So that's something you got to spend time learning. And you need to again have a decent understanding of how a drummer thinks, and you're again limited by the available samples and the articulations that these libraries provide. This next one is a Logic exclusive. This is something that I believe you'll not find on any DAW, whether you're using Pro Tools or Ableton or Cubase or whatever you're using, you're not going to find this. That is the drummer track within Logic. This is by far one of the most realistic MIDI drum loop bass performance that I have found. If you listen to all those subtle ghost notes in the snare, I mean, it sounds so realistic. I mean, it's very hard to tell somebody that this was not played by an actual drummer. And if I'm not wrong, as far as whatever little bit of reading up I did about the drummer tracks, they are played by actual drummers, which are then later converted into MIDI performances. You can control your fills, you can control the complexity and so many things using these little control panel here, and you can kind of customize the performance to make it unique for your song. I sometimes end up doing a combination of a MIDI controller based groove, which is very specific to the song that I'm working on, that I like a specific groove and I program that. And then I use the drummer track within Logic to write some of my drum fills and those ghost notes and those hi-hat stuff, and kind of blend the two. Gives a really nice result. It takes a little more time, but it's a very good exercise to try, and I would highly suggest and recommend that you try this at your home. The next one, if you don't have Logic and you don't have the drummer track, but you kind of want to use this feature anyway, is you can use a third-party plugin such as the GGD Modern and Massive, and you get a groove player, and you can try and use grooves. Now, these are again grooves played by actual drummers using a V-kit. Now, V-kit is one of the best ways of tracking an actual drummer. If you have access to a great sounding drummer and you don't have the luxury of a room and mics and preamps, then V-kit is a great way to go, because you're going to get an actual drummer playing and the performance is going to be so much more realistic. Check this out. Is the track muted? Yeah, it is. That sounds so cool. Yeah, you get a much more realistic sounding performance, and I'm also using a studio drummer, which happens to be Native Instruments default drum kit pattern here, drum library, and I've got a stadium based drum sound selected here. There are multiple options. You can choose something different. If you want, you can have a session kit or a garage kit. All of them are really good. And again, this one provides you grooves, but much more than what GGD gives you. There are genre based groove and at different tempo settings and fills and all of that I think is quite cool. You get fills here, something like this. Nice. Let's go blues rock. Let's go to metal. Interesting. There's so much more that you can do with these, especially if you don't have Logic Pro and you don't have the drummer track feature that you can use. And then you want to kind of rely on external libraries and grooves that these external libraries provide. With regards to using a V-kit, I think it's epic. You get extremely realistic sounding drum performances, MIDI drum performances. The only cons is we kit costs quite a bit of money, and you don't want to buy something that's cheap because it may not have so many different velocity triggers and different articulation triggers built into these, so that it can pick up every small nuance that a drummer would sort of introduce in his or her playing. But apart from that, if you can hire one and you can still get by, then that's a great option. Give it a shot. I would say there are some things that I think you should really consider when you're looking at MIDI drum performances. And the first one happens to be, do not quantize your drums to 100%. Don't quantize them to death. Some amount of imperfections is necessary for things to feel more musical. So try and keep some amount of that imperfections in your performances. And processing drums is the key to get rid of that plasticky sound. And real drums don't exactly sound this way. The samples do have, I don't know how to describe it. To me, it just sounds plasticky sometimes. You have to know how to get the best out of it. And processing drums is a subject by itself, and I think it requires another video. Can't really include that in this video episode. And do not overcompress your samples, because you've already received samples that are kind of compressed, that are kind of like processed quite a bit before you even start programming them. The libraries do it on their own while they give it to you. So you don't want to go and overcompress and overprocess it a lot, because you need to understand that if it sounds good the way it is, then just leave it at that. The last part would be, you might want to stack layers to achieve a unique sound. This is true. Like, if you don't want your drums to sound like Logic's drummer track or Logic drum sample libraries, you don't want people to listen to it and be like, hey, that sounds like that Logic drums. That's what you used, right? If you want something more unique, then try stacking different samples and EQ them and compress them differently and process them differently pretty much. And that's going to give you something really unique. You could maybe go for something like an acoustic kick layered with a drum machine type of a kick, or something of that sort. And I think that will immediately start giving you something really unique, especially if you bring in multiple samples, more than 2 samples, even in some cases. And if you listen to all the pop music stuff that's coming out, a lot of these things have multiple samples stacked to give you the kind of effect that they introduce in these tracks. So you've got to try and spend some time experimenting around this, and you'll find really great and interesting results. And I'll also say this, nothing comes close to an actual drum recording, because the small nuances that an actual drummer introduces on a drum kit is really hard to replicate on any of these methods. But having said that, it doesn't mean that if you don't have an actual drummer with a really good acoustic kit in the room and microphones and preamp and all of that, then that's the end. You can't have any drum performance in your song at all. That's not what it is. You can use these tools as an alternative and still come up with some very convincing and beautiful sounding drum parts. But if you keep some of the things that we discussed in the video in your mind while you're working on your virtual drum parts, then I think it'll help you get a fairly good result with it. So try and consider these points as you work on your drum parts. And I hope I've kind of addressed and helped pretty much all the things that is kind of pertains to this topic. And if there's something that you think I've left out, leave a comment below and let me know, and I'll try and respond to that as much as I can. And please do subscribe to this video and hit the notification bell so you're aware every time there's a new video. Thank you for staying with me. Thank you for supporting this channel and being with me through this short journey that I've had so far. And I'll see you soon in another video episode. My name is Varun, and from the Red Music Box, and don't forget to create, play, and record.